Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another Make and Tell Tuesday. Today we're going to be experimenting with stamping onto black cardstock. I'm going to be showing you a technique for getting brighter colors on this dark cardstock with a technique that I've nicknamed Black Magic. So for this technique, you will need a white pigment ink pad. I'm going to be using one from Paper Tray. You will also need an assortment of colored inks, and you have some choices here. I'm going to be using oxide inks in shades of green, ranging all the way from a bluey green to yellow greens. You can use the oxides. You can also use regular dye ink for this technique. I'll show you more about that in just a minute. I also gathered up a couple of other supplies that work really well for working on dark colored cardstock. I'm going to be adding some detailing with a white pen. I have a jelly roll pen. I'm also going to be using some metallic watercolors. To do our stamping today, I'm using images from our All Blessings Flow stamp set. This set works really well for this technique because they're just single one-step images. It makes it a little bit simpler. And of course you'll need some black cardstock, or you could experiment with other dark colors as well. You'll also need a stamping platform, which will allow you to stamp the images multiple times and line them up. I'm going to be using my Misty. So the little trick that we're going to be using today to get brighter, more vibrant colors on this dark black cardstock is to stamp first with white pigment ink. Then we're going to stamp a second time using our colored oxides. Here I've stamped out a couple of examples to show you how much more vibrant and colorful your inks will show if you first stamp in white. So I have a couple samples here. You can see I've stamped just straight onto the black cardstock with my oxide inks. And then here on these brighter colored leaves, I stamped first with the white ink. And you want to make sure that that white layer dries completely first, and then you can go ahead and stamp over the top of it. And you can see how it's just much more vibrant and just pops a whole lot more from that background than stamping directly onto the black. Using this technique, you can also turn any ordinary dye ink into something that shows up on dark colored cardstock. So for example, I stamped my same leaf in my white ink first, allowed that to dry, and then I stamped over top of it using just my regular, this is not an oxide ink, this is just the normal distress inks, which is just a dye ink. And I stamped beside it here as well, directly onto the cardstock, but of course you can't see that because it does not show up at all. But if you stamp with the white first, of course that color then can pop. So let's go ahead and see this technique in action and create a pretty background. So I have my sticky Cricut mat. If you watch any of my videos, you know that I like to put a Cricut mat that I cut down that's sticky inside my Misty, and that just helps to hold everything in place. Now normally if I need to realign something really easily, I will of course use the guides and the rulers and place my panel up in the corner. But since we're doing some stamping, I have lots of images from the All Blessings Flow set already set up in here. Those images extend beyond the edge of our panel of cardstock, and so putting it up in the corner doesn't work so well. So I have a couple of magnets that come with the Misty, the bar magnets, also aligned so that I can make sure that my cardstock is getting back into the right exact position, because we're going to have to take it out to do some drying with a heat gun and put this back, and we really need it to realign just right. So I have my magnets there as an additional guide. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp all of these images that I already have set up in my Misty. I have them set up so that when I do my first stamping here, it will cover about half of my panel. And I'm going to give these images a couple of impressions. The more opaque your background is, or your bottom layer, your white layer, the more opaque that is, the more vibrant your second layer will be. So I'm going to give that a couple of impressions so that we can get it nice and opaque. Then to finish off my panel, I'm going to rotate my cardstock 180 degrees and stamp again. And again, I'm going to do multiple impressions to get this white layer nice and solid and opaque as possible. So now we want our white layer to be completely dry before we move on to stamping the color. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that with my heat gun and dry that thoroughly. So I'm back and my white ink is completely dry now thanks to my heat gun. Now we're going to go ahead and add the different colors over the top. I have my cardstock panel right back into position with my magnets helping me to line that up again, and now I'm going to be using these little sponge daubers to do the stamping with the different colors. This allows me to just ink up these images individually. You may need to give each image multiple impressions to build up the color. I'm just going to continue stamping until all of my white images are re-stamped with color. So I finished re-stamping all of those images and now they're all colored. I'm going to hit this with my heat gun once again to make sure these are nice and dry before we go in and add some details. So I've pulled out my metallic watercolors and my white pen so we can add some details. You could also use a metallic marker. Mine is missing in action right now at the moment, so I'm using my metallic watercolors along with a stylus. So I'm wetting my gold here just to get that going and activated. And then I'm going to just take my stylus and dip it into that watercolor. And I'm just going to add some dotting. So now we want that nice and dry once again before I move on to the next step, which is going to be adding some details with the white pen. So once again, I'm going to dry that with my heat gun. So now we're going to take our white pen and add some details. The first thing I'm going to do is just add some stems and little leaves to those gold berries that we just added. Maybe just some dots to a few of them. Just some simple little doodles to enhance that. Don't be scared of this step, you can do it. Next, we're going to go into our stamped images and add some veins to the leaves and just some dots. Just keep going until you have as much detail added as you'd like. Alright, so we're all finished adding the details with the white pen and the gold paint. And now I'm just going to go ahead and finish that off with a sentiment. This is from our Opposites Attract stamp set. I have die cut it from black cardstock and heat embossed it with gold. It's just going to be a nice simple finishing touch. And our panel is finished. I can go ahead and add that to a card base and it's ready to go. Thanks for joining me for this week's Make and Tell Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed this little technique that I've nicknamed Black Magic, and I hope you're inspired to give it a try.